Welcome back to another GTN Coaches Corner. On this week's show, how do my intervals translate to my race pace?
How does a middle-aged triathlete find speed?
I've lost a whole bunch of weight. How do I stop losing weight and keep the muscle on now?
And should I do all just long, easy swims, or should they involve intervals in all of them?
Yeah, and one more question of what should my warm-up look like for a sprint distance race? Okay, we're going to get to your questions. Remember, you guys can ask your own questions. Leave them in the comments down below this. Use the hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. We could be answering your questions next week.
Okay, first question from user Y04JS. We've got a very specific question from a bot here. Any ideas why my interval training pace does not seem to translate to race performance? I can comfortably do 5 by 1K at sub 4 minute per kilometer pace with 60 seconds rest, but trying to put together 5 kilometers, I blow up after a couple of kilometers. Many thanks for any pointers you can offer.
It doesn't actually say what pace he's trying to run his race at.
Trying to run it at 4 minute
at the same pace he's doing his intervals? Yeah, because that's really not going to work. The thing is, even with short rest like 60 seconds, you're getting a lot of recovery. It might not feel like a lot of recovery at the time, but you're getting a lot of recovery. You're going a long way to decreasing that oxygen debt and the decreasing those lactate levels that you built up during that 4 minute effort that you did that one interval. So you need to bear that in mind, that if you put them all next to each other, you're going to lead to levels of oxygen debt that are unsustainable, lactate levels that are unsustainable. You just cannot run that same pace.
Because it's funny, when you do a session like that, 60 seconds flies by and you do think, well, I haven't really managed to recover that well. You're doing a great session as well, because that is quite minimal recovery for the intensities and the length of the reps that you're doing. So good job, but there's more to this really.
Yeah, for 5 kilometers, you can actually run slightly above your threshold. So we're going to assume that user, whatever their name is going to is running those intervals at slightly above threshold. At 4 minutes per K is the interval pace. That's a bit above threshold. And you can run a 5 kilometer race at above threshold, but only slightly. And I mean just a little bit, and only if you're fit. So say they're running their intervals at 4 minutes a K and their threshold is 4:20 per K. They might be able to run a 5 kilometer at 4:10 to 4:15 per kilometer. They can't really run it at 4 minutes a kilometer. Now, if you push that out a little bit and you're actually doing 10 by 1 kilometer intervals with 60-second rest at 4 minutes per K, then probably you can actually manage 5 kilometers without those rests and do 5 of them in a row. But if you can only manage 5 intervals with 60 seconds rest at that pace, you just can't run that continuously for 5Ks. You need to be more realistic with your race goals.
I've attempted it many times for videos and don't recommend it.
The king of blowing up.
Right, next one from Michael Z1. Basically 42 years old. He's had 15 years out from triathlon, or it sounds like maybe endurance sport, full stop. He's now got 2 young kids and would really like to get back into doing triathlon to also inspire them. So he said, this year I want to do 3 sprint distances of a very small local competition and try and get a good performance. I'm training regularly, but speeding up is hard at this age. So I think I need to work on technique as well. What would you recommend? A coach is quite costly, and most I can find don't seem to be focusing on technical aspects, but I could be wrong. It kind of goes on from there. Now, technique is obviously always a really good thing to focus on, and also as an older athlete as well, making sure that you are performing the correct techniques, form is correct across all sports for injury prevention, and just trying to get the most out of your body to be as efficient as possible. But you need to be doing a little bit more than technique.
Yeah, speed doesn't only come from technique, particularly on biking and running. And you'll find as you get older into your 40s and 50s that strength losses and muscle losses are actually the thing that you need to fight the most, rather than working on your technique. And that comes from a good, well-structured program where you're actually hitting those higher zones, you're doing the harder work, you're doing strength work, potentially in the gym, or even just strength work in the actual run and bike sessions. And you need to make sure that you're hitting all those aspects of training to make sure that you can build your speed. It is significantly harder to build speed. It's easier to maintain it if you had it when you were younger and you kept training through, but it is significantly more difficult to build speed when you are a bit older, but it is not impossible. You can do it. The one exception might be with swimming. Swimming is very technique focused, and you may benefit from actually having someone on deck who can correct those technique issues and get more benefit from that than just actually plowing on and doing hard work in the swim.
I will say, just to follow on from James' point about strength work, that is one area that I found with older athletes in the past to really benefit hugely from. Actually upping the amount of strength work can really help with that power, because as you said, you tend to lose strength as you get older.
I reckon a few more years and then I'll have to stop that. Next one, Kramer69. Hello GTN team. Since starting my triathlon journey in 2022, I've lost about 18 kgs, 40 pounds. While I feel great and have continued to improve over time, I feel that I'm approaching the lower limits of a good weight for me. As we come into the outdoor season with longer training sessions, more calories burned, what are some tips for maintaining a good weight and making sure that all-important muscle mass isn't being lost?
Wow.
Well, firstly, well done.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That is impressive. Not the kind of problem that most people are writing into us are having. He's kind of gone the other end of the spectrum.
And you're right in saying there is a point of being too thin, and actually that will start to affect your performance because you'll start to lose things like your strength, your power, as you've kind of alluded to.
Yeah. So the solution then is to start shifting the way you think about your food. Obviously, to lose that much weight, you are going to have thought about eating as a calorie restriction, a calorie kind of deficit, so that you can lose that weight throughout this time. You now need to shift your focus, now that you're at your goal weight, to eating for performance. You need to make sure that you are well fueled for every session and well fueled for the recovery from those sessions. Essentially now you need to shift your whole focus from eating for weight loss to eating for performance. You need to change your lifestyle where eating activates or facilitates your lifestyle rather than the other way around, that eating is something that you have to restrict in order to get to your lifestyle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you want to make sure that you are getting the calories in and around and during your training now, because as James says, this is all about performance. So you're eating healthily, but you're fueling up well in advance of those sessions, during those sessions, to maintain that performance. But also, and this is where, again, this mindset is going to be difficult, but just making sure that you are never going into that calorie deficit or fasted training, because you really just don't need to be.
Yeah, you'll notice that athletes, and elite athletes particularly, don't really eat 3 meals a day that are well controlled. They kind of eat in the gaps between the training. So they'd eat like 2 hours before a session to make sure they're well fueled for that session. They then eat something immediately afterwards to recover from that. It doesn't really follow the normal sedentary person's lifestyle of breakfast, lunch, dinner. You need to kind of eat around your training, and therefore once you do that and becomes part of your lifestyle, that weight management is a little bit easier. And now we're not trying to make this sound easy. This is a struggle, and it's always going to be a struggle. But if you can shift that whole perspective from eating is something negative that you have to avoid and you have to restrict, to eating is something that I need to do to make me perform better, that becomes a sustainable thing in your lifestyle, that you will never have to think about your weight ever again, which is the goal.
Yeah, brilliant. Next question. Now, this is an interesting one. We've not actually had this before, but I don't believe we've had a question on these lines before, but I think it's a really interesting topic. It's from Alexander Barra, after 19. Hi guys, I was wondering about how I should distribute my training intensity in swimming. As far as I know, contrary to running and cycling, a polarized approach where you would only do 1 to 2 HIIT sessions a week and the rest should be zone 2, does not really apply to swimming. I got told that only doing easy swims does not really improve anything. Hence, there should be more focus on intervals. That being said, if you swim 5 to 6 times a week, you cannot do intervals every single day either. Please shed some light on this. Now, actually, this is true. We'll get into this in a second. You know, as a swimmer before triathlon, more or less every day I was doing hard intervals, and I was swimming 11 times a week at the point. So, yeah,
it's a curious feature of swimming. Like running and cycling, you always go out for these just easy run.
Yeah.
And you never actually get in the pool and just do an easy swim. There's always something in there that you have to focus on. Now, there's actually 3 reasons for this. We're going to run through them so that you can understand why it ends up being the way it is. Firstly, it's boring. Just following a black line, just getting in for 45 minutes, backwards and forwards, is not in any way stimulating. If you can stop it, break it up, it obviously makes it a lot easier to get through more distance. It's less tedious, so that obviously that mental strain is lower. Secondly, it's non-weight bearing. So swimming doesn't create muscle damage necessarily from any impact, which means you can do hard sessions and back them up with more hard sessions and back them up with more hard sessions. As long as you slightly change in the energy system, you're not actually going to be doing damage on top of damage, because the damage is not the same as it is for cycling and running, which have some weight-bearing component. And then finally, swimming is technique-based. That means that every time you push off the wall, your technique gradually, as you get tired, diminishes and diminishes and diminishes. And if you're just getting in and swimming after whatever your limit is, 500 meters, 800 meters, 1,000 meters, your technique has fallen into a pattern that is not optimal, and you're then reinforcing poor strategy, poor technique. And at that point, you need to stop on the wall, reset, and push off again with a good technique, which is why almost all swim sessions are broken up into intervals of varying intensities.
Yeah, so I'm actually afraid to tell you, Alexander, that you can do 5 to 6 swim sessions a week with intervals. In fact, you probably should be. That doesn't mean every session is the same. Some will have a focus on short, high intensity intervals, some slightly longer reps, 200, 400 meter reps. So each session should still have their focus rather than you just turning up and doing a bunch of intervals of the same sort of duration every single day. Each will have their focus, but yeah, you definitely can do high intensity work.
You can't do maximal intervals every session, but you can do some high intensity work in pretty much every swim session. Sorry to tell you, next one, final question from Alex Walmsley. He says, hashtag GTN Coaches Corner, I'm supposed to be sprinting at the end of my warm-up? What? Okay, so what does the perfect warm-up for a sprint triathlon and how long before the event should I be doing it, bearing in mind the ungodly hour we usually start at? My current warm-up involves walking to the toilet and back a few times, jogging on the spot whilst chatting to people. Thanks. Okay, your current warm-up is insufficient.
This is interesting, isn't it? Because obviously he's talking about a sprint triathlon. What sort of warm-up did you used to do for an Ironman?
I would generally jog for 15 to 20 minutes, get properly warm before I put my wetsuit on, before I got ready for the swim. And I mean, obviously it feels a bit like you're wasting energy, but that warmth, that getting your body actually moving, was paid dividends, definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got to be honest, when I stepped up to longer distance racing, my warm-ups almost more or less disappeared bar a few minutes of running.
They do become less important in longer distance, but they're still important.
Yeah, obviously, what we're getting at, the shorter the distance, the more important that warm-up is, because you are going at such a higher intensity and effort, and you're requiring so much more of your body, so you need to be warm and ready for that. I'm not sure a few runs back and forwards to the toilets are quite going to suffice.
Yeah. No. So your warm-up really gets you ready to get into race pace as quickly as possible without any injury risk, but also just being able to judge that pace. If you're cold and your body your body temperature is moving and changing as you're trying to judge your pace, the pace is going to change how it feels, and it's really hard to judge how you're starting that. So you want to be warm. But here's the curious thing about warm-up that most people don't realize. You can do it well in advance of the actual start and still get almost all the effects of someone who did it in the last few seconds before the start. You don't need to come running up to the start line, wait a few seconds and go to be warm. You can warm up an hour before, and that warm-up effect of your body actually getting all the muscles warm, getting all the blood flowing, will still be there. Almost all of that effect will still be there. So do a considerable warm-up as much as an hour before the start. Make sure you're properly warm, make sure your heart rate is up, make sure your muscles feel warm. Get past that point where you almost feel like you start sweating. That, for me, it's normally like 6 or 7 minutes of running before I kind of feel that like flash of warmth come through my body. And then you know you've actually hit the warm-up point, and then you're okay. Loosen up the arms, loosen up the legs, and then you can wait an hour, put your wetsuit on, get to the start line, and the effect will still be there.
Yeah.
But you do need to do a considerable warm-up.
Now, you do mention about sprinting in a warm-up, kind of tongue-in-cheek, I know, but for a shorter distance event, in fact, any event you can for that matter, it is a good idea to just throw in some very, very short intervals. Not enough that they're going to tire you or exhaust you, but it's a good opportunity to just activate and recruit muscles ahead of the day. Just get things woken up basically ahead of the event.
Yeah, activate that lactate threshold, lactate tolerance that your body is using the fact that there's lactate there already before you start. It's definitely going to make a difference to your race performance. Okay, that's it for this week's show. As we say, if you have any of your questions, leave them in the comments below this video or any of our videos, hashtag GTN Coaches Corner, and we'll be answering them next time. Thanks for watching.